My name is Josh, and today we're going to be talking about dogfooding your developer products and gathering feedback from engineers at an internal company hackathon. So this topic is a bit adjacent to DevOps, but I hope it'll be useful to those of you who create developer tools for teams of engineers outside your company, and maybe even those of you who build developer tools or DevOps tools for folks inside your company. So I recently started a new job in Stockholm, and my job here is to work on Spotify's developer products and to build resources for the community of developers who are building integrations and third-party apps for Spotify's platform. Many of you may not be familiar with Spotify's developer platform, so here's a quick overview. We have three popular developer products. The first one is our web API. Among other things, the web API can be used to create and edit playlists, follow other users, start and stop playback of a track or a podcast episode, and also fetch information from Spotify's catalog of music and podcasts, which we would call metadata. A newer product that we offer is the Web Playback SDK. And the Web Playback SDK is a JavaScript library that allows developers to stream music or podcast episodes in supported web browsers. And then finally, there's Spotify's Embedded SDK, which is a C library that developers can include in hardware devices like speakers to power audio playback. So quite a few companies these days have internal hackathons. And these are events where teams or engineers inside the company can work on projects of their choosing, sometimes for 2 days, sometimes for up to a week. And during my second week on the new job, there was one such event at Spotify, which we call Hack Week. And this Hack Week involved more than 100 teams across Spotify's offices worldwide. And each team had 5 days to build a product or a feature of their choosing. And then at the end of Hack Week, share it with the rest of the company. Projects from Hack Week sometimes make it into our core product, like Discover Weekly, which is a popular playlist in Spotify's app. So this event is a pretty big deal, and a lot of developers look forward to it all year. And I had two goals during Hack Week. One was to try to not get in the way in my second week on the job. And the second goal was to learn as much as I could about our developer experience from the hackathon teams who were using our public API and SDK products during Hack Week, of which there were many. Now, gathering DX insights from internal engineering teams can be tough. Those teams are different from developers outside your company, and they often bring background knowledge about the product to their work that an external developer may not have. But I still think you can learn a lot from an internal hackathon. And based on what happened at this and other internal hackathons that I've been involved with, I came up with a few tips that I think make it easier to get useful DX insights from an internal hack event like Hack Week. So the first tip I would offer is that it helps to avoid collecting feedback on your entire platform or product. For me at a hackathon, it can be very tempting to collect and document every scrap of feedback that I get from the developers we're supporting. Instead, during Spotify Hack Week, I decided to pick two very specific topics that I wanted to study and then do a deep dive on those. This could be a new tutorial that you've created for external developers. It could be a new sample app skeleton that you're offering to both internal developers and external developers. Or maybe it's a chat ops flow that you've created for managing services and resources. Focusing on a small area helps to really go deep on the areas where you really want to gather feedback from and reduce the risk of overanalyzing comments about an area that maybe you didn't look at as closely during the hackathon. I think that focusing on 2 or 3 topics is also really important because it helps you to create actionable insights for the product team. What you don't want to wind up with after hackathon is a sort of unfocused giant list of every piece of feedback that you heard. That can be very tough for a product team to sift through and, again, create actions from. So narrowing your focus to the topics that you really want feedback on helps you do that. Another step that I think is really important is to be aware of which resources that your internal developers decide to use when they build their hacks using your tool or SDK. Again, your internal engineering teams tend to have access to resources like log files, source code, and other developers inside the company who may have worked on the tools that they're going to use. And when a hackathon team decides to avoid using a public-facing piece of documentation and rely on internal know-how or other resources that wouldn't normally be publicly available, those choices can be really insightful, and they could actually indicate a gap or a problem with what's publicly available for developers. Or it could indicate that your public resources were hard to find. That being said, like any live hackathon, you can expect that some processes and products will be used in unexpected ways. At a hackathon, sometimes time is of the essence. And so it can be very difficult to test an asynchronous process like a help desk, where maybe the typical response time is a day. So you would want to avoid testing something that is going to take a very long time to set up or maybe get a response from. Hackathons are a good place to test resources or tools or SDKs that a developer can access and use right away in their hacks. And then the last tip that I want to talk about is taking some time at the end of your internal hackathon to interview developers one-on-one about their experience with your chosen process or product area. A lot of people do surveys after a hackathon to ask developers about the tooling that they've used. And surveys have their place, but it can be very tough, at least I find it hard, to strike a balance between making the survey simple enough that people will want to answer, but then also long enough to actually get the background information that you need to make the feedback actionable and to put it into context. So it may take a little bit longer, but I personally prefer to do a handful of interviews with developers who've used the tool or the SDK that I want to study. This allows me to ask follow-up questions and to dig deeper on what the developer may be saying in terms of feedback. Some people may also want to provide more feedback in a conversation than they would in a survey that they receive a couple of days after the event. So when organizing these interviews, I always give some context into why we're having the interview. So I want to let them know that the chat is about making the product better. And I try to keep the conversation casual and low pressure. You don't want it to feel like it's some kind of test. And then with their permission, I do record the session so that I can play it back later. This helps to, of course, capture all of the feedback that we receive, but then also means that I don't have to furiously take notes during the conversation. I can just focus on the chat and focus on the conversation that we're having. And then at the start of the interview, I usually take some time to understand their day-to-day job and the technology that they normally work with, and even their technical background. So which type of technology they typically use. This helps you put the feedback into context and learn more about where they're coming from when they provide feedback to you about the SDK or the product that you're looking to study. It's also really good to ask about the goals of the project. One of the exciting things about a hackathon is that you often find people using your SDK or your developer product in a way that you'd never imagined they would. So that in itself is very interesting feedback. And it's also important context for other feedback that you may receive from the developer, understanding the exact use case where they were trying to use your tool or the process that you were wanting to test and study. And when it comes to asking about your chosen features or product area, it helps to bring pre-planned questions and to be very specific. So instead of asking a super open-ended question like, what do you think about our developer sign-up flow? Or what features would you like to see in product X? A question I might ask would be, what was the biggest pain point involved with process Y, like obtaining an API token, for example? But having pre-planned questions doesn't mean that you have to stick to the script. One of the benefits of an interview is that you can always take detours and ask follow-ups when the conversation is relevant and when you're getting insightful feedback from the developer about the SDK you want to study. Once I have the recordings, I like to transcribe each interview and write down everything that was said in the conversation. There might be an easier way to do this, but for me at least, I find that writing down everything that was said is super helpful. And then I take the interview transcripts to build a report that can inform my team about the feedback that we were getting on the areas that we were looking to study. And the most important thing here is that we're not only gathering the feedback, but we're also placing that feedback into context. So we know not only that developers didn't like X about product Y, but we also know and can communicate exactly what they were trying to achieve with that tool or that process when they gave us that feedback. So those are all my tips. Thank you for having me. By the way, I should mention that Spotify is hiring. We recently launched a work from anywhere program. So there's amazing job openings all over the world. If you're looking for more information, you can visit spotifyjobs.com to find out about our current openings.